Negotiations over a plan to end the war in Gaza are scheduled to start in Qatar today. The region is on edge as Israel awaits retaliation from Iran after the killing of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Negotiators want to use a plan put together by the Biden administration at the end of May and endorsed by the UN Security Council. It calls for a 6-week ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas would release its remaining Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Israel would allow in unlimited aid deliveries, and its forces would withdraw from Gaza. But Hamas says it's losing faith in the U.S. as a mediator and will not attend the talks. The top official in Qatar for the Palestinian militant group, whose October 7th terror attack sparked the war, said Hamas was still willing to be briefed afterward on the discussed points.
We expect to be told by the mediators that Israel has accepted what is being offered, and any meeting should be based on talking about implementation mechanisms and setting deadlines rather than negotiating something new. Otherwise, Hamas finds no reason to participate.
Our correspondent Felix Tamsut joins us now from Jerusalem. Felix, ceasefire talks are set to continue today in Qatar, but as we heard, Hamas is not taking part in those talks. Given that, what's the prospect of reaching any meaningful agreement?
Well, I think the mediators are sort of counting on progress being made with Israel for them then to get in contact with Hamas, whose representatives are in Doha anyways. It's going to be interesting to see how this pans out. Here in Israel, several media outlets are reporting on these negotiations as the last chance of reaching a deal. We've been hearing that before, it needs to be said, but at the same time, it is a crucial day for the negotiations when it comes to a possible ceasefire in Gaza.
Now, the mediators, that includes the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar, they say they only need to work out the details of implementation of the deal that's already on the table. So what are the sticking points there?
Well, there are several issues in those negotiations. First of all, the issue of the Israelis being held hostages in Gaza. Israel would like to receive a list of the some 30 hostages released alive, which Israel demands to be released alive. Hamas only wants to release such a list after a general agreement will be made. There's also the issue of the so-called Philadelphia corridor, which is in principle the border area between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, which has been a sort of lifeline for Hamas in terms of getting both goods and army material into the Gaza Strip, which Israel doesn't want to leave without any sort of overview of everything that's going on there. And the last point, which is also a very important sticking point here, is the issue of the return of Palestinians to the north of the Gaza Strip. Israel would like to have some sort of a mechanism which controls the returning Palestinians to make sure no armed people make it through, whereas Hamas is a bit more critical about that. It remains to be seen whether any progress will be made as the negotiations go on today.
Getting the hostages back, of course, is a huge priority for Israel. What kind of pressure is the hostage situation putting on Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, to come to an agreement here?
I think we have two elements of this sort of pressure you mentioned. First of all, we have pressure within Israel. Most of the hostages' families are putting lots of public pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli government to get a deal done. It needs to be said that most of the Israeli public supports such a deal. At the same time, there's pressure from the outside as well, into the mediators and European countries which are allies to Israel, such as Germany, have been demanding such a deal. And of course, above all, there's the issue of the Iranian retaliation over the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, looming above all. And I think this results a too pressured system over the Israeli government, and it remains to be seen whether this would bring us to a situation where an agreement or some sort of a frame agreement will be reached today.
Felix, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Felix Tamsut, in Jerusalem. Let's get some analysis now from Professor Yossi Mekelberg. He's with the Middle East and North Africa program at the think tank Chatham House. Thanks for being with us. Yossi, this deal being discussed in Doha has been on the table for months already. Why are we suddenly seeing movement in these negotiations now? What's changed?
Good morning. I think the main change is that the international community is losing its patience with both sides, and it wants to see it wants to see a ceasefire, the release of the hostages, humanitarian aid, enter into Gaza, and most importantly, start looking to the day after the end of the war. But what happened right now is because it's connected, closely linked also with an expected attack by Iran and Hezbollah, either at the same time, simultaneously, or separately on Israel as a result of Israel two assassinations, one in Beirut and the other in Tehran, of the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, and the Hezbollah official in Beirut, So I think right now, the link between reaching such an agreement with averting such an attack that can drag the entire Middle East into a full-blown war.
So there is fresh momentum here. How much negotiating power, though, does Hamas have left at this point, given all of the defeats that it's suffered so far?
I think mainly its main card is the hostages. It's holding around 120 hostages. We don't know how many of them are still alive. And I think the pressure also mounting inside Israel to reach an agreement in the release of the hostages, which the Netanyahu government is delaying and putting new condition every time. There is the Biden proposal that Netanyahu was behind it and drafting it, and then he started delaying, and the government delaying because of the pressure of the far right not to reach such an agreement. They put a priority on maintaining the war against Hamas, then the release of the hostages. I think this card is still a strong one in the end of Hamas, but Hamas needs the end of the war because of the suffering of the people in Gaza. At one point, this can turn against the organization. But also bear in mind, in recent weeks, lost many of its leadership.
Yeah. How difficult do you think it will be to reach a meaningful deal under these circumstances?
Extremely difficult. I think we shouldn't underestimate, because as it stands, it doesn't seem, while the world has this sense of urgency to reach an agreement and avert a war, also a regional war, ending the war in Gaza, it already claimed the life of so many innocent people. I think the leadership itself don't share this sense of urgency. And definitely in the case of Netanyahu, he is afraid of his government collapsing as a result of an agreement. The far right in the government keeps saying that it would leave in case of such an agreement. At the same time, they are provoking, for instance, by praying in Temple Mount in Jerusalem is a sheer provocation of the Muslim world. So there are parallel conversations within Israeli politics that make it more and more difficult to reach an agreement.
What role is the United States playing in all of this now? It's been pressuring Israel and Hamas, of course, to come to the negotiating table, but Hamas is skeptical about having the U.S. as a mediator in this negotiation. Where does the U.S. stand in this now?
I think we have to look at the three mediators as almost one package. It's the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. And at the end of the day, whether the Hamas trusts the United States or not, they understand that the main country that could pressure on the Netanyahu government to reach an agreement is the United States. also recognize that the United States right now is different from the one that was a few weeks ago when we thought that President Biden would run for a second term. I think he is freer now to express his opinions about the Netanyahu government. He's highly critical of it. And at the same time, we see also that Vice President Kamala Harris, who is going to run on behalf of the Democrats, she's more worried about how the progressive voters in the United States would react in the election if there is no ceasefire. I think in this sense, Hamas needs to accept that if it wants a ceasefire, it wants a deal, it goes through Washington.
Yossi, thank you very much for that. That was Yossi Mekelberg of Chatham House.